My name's Craig Scott. I'm a musician, improviser, composer, and I make instruments as well. At the moment I'm working with instruments that are simultaneously played by human musicians and digitally controlled from the computer. I got introduced to Frank Zappa too early, and it kind of skewed my whole... I don't know, there was always this drive from then to like for something to feel completely alien or new. So yeah, that skewed everything from quite an early age. And I guess in terms of like musically my practice, I'm trying to just recontextualize things to the point where it feels new, I guess, but without kind of losing everything that I've learned from the kind of lineages and canons and that kind of thing. So just reinterpreting that through a new kind of, or in a new context or through a new medium, maybe. So I originally started making my own equipment just to facilitate the recording process, mainly due to financial restrictions. And then, as these things do, it kind of snowballs and gets out of hand. And it was maybe in the last 4 or 5 years I kind of started working with digital microcontrollers as well. Originally it was all like analog audio stuff, essentially, and I was kind of drawn to this strange juxtaposition between the kind of precision and relentless exact repetition of digital control, but the unnatural response of the real world, essentially, so like acoustic sources. So it kind of led me to, there's an album that I'm just about to release that's all digitally controlled acoustic percussion, the toy piano, some things like flower pots and stuff like that. So that's like the first kind of full foray into this world, I suppose. And then recently with this project, I've been a similar-ish process but with a guitar. So it's kind of in a way like a folding back into my previous life, or not previous life, it's maybe unnecessary, but yeah, it's kind of a folding of the practice back into being able to improvise on the guitar and still have a lot of these kind of technological interfering appendages kind of going at the same time. And then there's a friction between these two things, I think, as well, which is quite interesting. So friction in terms of like creating energy and tension musically, I suppose, as much as anything else. Yeah. So exactly what I'm making is a electric guitar that has been prepared with digitally controlled solenoids, they're called, so essentially a little electromagnetic piano. You could think of them as piano hammers or something like that, but with not as nice tone as a piano hammer. So there's some on the bridge of the guitar, so they just strike the individual strings. And then for the first 4 frets on the other side of the guitar, there's also solenoids in each string. So I've got like 2 and a little bit octaves that can be controlled from the computer. And then everything in between is free for me to access to play myself or another guitar player. So at the moment, it's essentially the goal is to be able to improvise with it, so it will respond in real time to me playing. So at the moment, I mean, I can set lots of different settings, but at the moment I'm just playing note for note exchange, so I'll play a note, it'll play a note. But the way that I tend to play as well, I think is maybe quite... I'm quite drawn to this as well because of just sort of the chaos of it, to be honest, as well. And up until relatively recently, even within my own practice, I was kind of thinking about digital control as kind of precision, exact repetition. But then with this, it feels much more chaotic, and it's closer to the kind of density of our surrounding kind of digital world. So it's all, you know, very precise and everything, but there's so much of it and it's happening, you know, on so many levels at once that it's just this kind of extremely, chaotic environment to be a part of. So like the initial part of the mechanization of the guitar was all this end. So that's essentially to either trigger a string being struck or initiate a feedback loop. So there was a thing happening where a lot of the time the digital mechanized parts of the instrument would initiate a sound, and you could just only then manipulate from that point, which I've, to begin with, found quite interesting, of that you're not ever responsible for initiating something happening. You're only able to kind of do what you can to manipulate it from that point. But then this next stage of the project, I've built another appendage to go on the other end of the guitar, which essentially means that the computer can control it melodically and harmonically as well, which then means that we could start using like machine learning algorithms to just give the computer more of a voice. So really what I'm doing now is just working with very small data sets, and it's relatively simple as far as machine learning goes now, very simple. And the goal is to be improvising on the guitar, and the machine learning program will respond in real time, so it will be just a real-time like feedback loop conversation happening note for note at the moment, which feels very kind of micro and might end up losing context of kind of macro, if that makes sense, because it's all just focused on an exchange of one-to-one to one-to-one. But then, I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how much that does affect kind of the larger scale forms of the pieces, or if they're just this constant kind of like chatter in the moment that never kind of builds or never kind of, never goes anywhere. It might tend towards that, I'm not sure. But then I suppose it'll be my responsibility to be more aware of the kind of larger scale compositional aspects. But then another thing I could, well, just by using more sophisticated machine learning tools, I could then give that responsibility to the machine learning or the automation aspect, and it could be more aware of the kind of macro form while I get completely lost in the moment consistently, which might be interesting again, or it might be, I don't know, it's this thing of you're constantly giving away control at the same time as receiving support or inspiration or feedback. Yeah, so we'll see. It could go either way. I think that, I mean, I'd like to say it's fundamentally different, obviously, but I don't know, it's a difference between like striving towards and building technology that reinforces maybe like an ideal, or like one idea of like what things should be, and using the technology to expand the possibilities of what it could be, I suppose. Yeah, and also, yeah, it's really like, probably the simplest way to answer that would be, it's kind of anti-perfectionists kind of thing, like it's an expansive rather than a kind of funneling process, or an aid to expand rather than to kind of contract and focus. I'm just starting to really experience what it's like to play with the instrument. I don't want to say intelligent instrument. What could we call it? The instrument that's making decisions apparently of its own volition. I've only really started to improvise with it, and even at this very early stage where there's still a lot of kind of creases started out, it does feel like it is fairly convincing that it's not that you would treat it in the same way that you treat a human being making decisions necessarily, but it's just the fact that it's not a linear kind of input output. So it will surprise you and it's not going to give you the same thing over and over again, even if you feed it the same thing over and over again. And even that in itself is enough once you're kind of like in a position where you're giving yourself over to being in the moment and responding to, you know, because you could improvise with some raindrops falling outside. So if you approach whatever it is that you're duetting with as if it, you know, it's intending music, then you perceive it as music and you interpret and, you know, act accordingly, I suppose. Yeah, so I think it will be fairly convincing, and as it gets more sophisticated, it could become quite scary. We'll see. The one thing that I think the worst case scenario basically is it could become the equivalent to one of these like phone application girlfriends, like the musical equivalent of that, at very worst. No, it's just my hand, like trapped nerve. It might be worth talking about, actually. It's a strange kind of like, I've started adding a digital hand to the end of the guitar as this hand has kind of like, you know. So while I've been building this, I've had initially just like a lot of back pain, but now it's come to just being like a kind of loss of sensation in these fingers. And I was kind of like thinking a lot about, again, Marshall McLuhan, a lot of what he talks about, and he always talks about kind of extensions, and that inherently with a technological extension there's an amputation as well, so you're losing the ability to, whatever you're giving control over, your, you know, over time going to lose the ability to actually manipulate yourself. So maybe there's some sort of strange, I don't know, cosmic joke going on, but hopefully I'll recover. No, it's not that, it's just like, it still feels like it's brought a lot to my practice in the sense of like, this instrument feels almost like I am duetting with another entity, shall we say. I don't want to be like human or you know, but in terms of what it will actually become, I think it's still quite hard to say. It feels like there's a lot of potential there, but I don't want to kind of, you know, I don't know, maybe I'll probably be wrong if I try to put my finger on what it is. I'll look like a fool. I think it will change my practice quite drastically, and I think it has a lot of potential to go in a few different directions. In terms of like, I think I'll have to be aware of trying to make up for all of my, I say my like perceived shortcomings, like the things that you know, everybody has things that they're aware of that they think, oh, I need to be able to. So like, trying not to push the tech too much into those kind of voids or those holes, and like, I think there are, yeah, there are kind of dangers where it could be quite easy to like make up for all of my shortcomings with the technology. I'm going to try and avoid that. I think I want to like, everybody's responsible for everything kind of thing, and for it to be a kind of perpetual conversation between the two things, rather than it's like to settle into roles too much, because I think if it could be quite easy to do that, and kind of, you know, you could get away with it. You can make passable music and have all your insecurities kind of like covered by a machine. There's another record that I was kind of like in the process, and I've done quite a bit of playing and one or two small gigs with the drummer with a partially mechanized kit as well, a good friend of mine. So I'd quite like, I think, to do a duo with him to begin with, where both the instruments are partially controlled and also maybe interconnected, so there's this kind of like, it is almost one decision-making process that's controlling both of those instruments, and yeah, see how that kind of affects our relationship.